The winter wind howled through the narrow streets of Maplewood, a small town where the days were short, and the nights seemed endless. Frost clung to every windowpane, and the gray sky hung heavy, pressing down on the quiet rows of houses. In one of those houses, on the corner of Elm Street, lived an elderly woman named Mrs. Evelyn Harper. Evelyn had lived alone for many years. Her husband had passed away a decade ago, and her children had long since moved to distant cities. The house still smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon, memories of warmer days. The fire in her hearth rarely burned anymore, wood was expensive, and her pension barely covered groceries and medicine. She spent her days bundled in worn sweaters, knitting scarves she would never wear and watching the world pass by through the frosted glass. On this particular morning, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea. She glanced at the calendar pinned to the wall. It was December 19th, almost Christmas. Once, that date had meant laughter, family dinners, and the smell of cookies baking in the oven. Now, it was just another day to endure. Outside, a group of children hurried down the street, their laughter carried by the cold air. Evelyn watched them for a moment, her heart tightening with a mixture of nostalgia and loneliness. She turned her gaze away, unwilling to let herself feel the ache of what was missing. Across town, in a cluttered workshop that smelled of oil and pine, a young man named Daniel worked on repairing an old wooden chair. He was 27, with hands roughened by work and a spirit that had seen its share of hardship. After losing his job at the factory 2 years ago, he had started fixing and restoring furniture for the townsfolk, earning just enough to get by. But Daniel's heart was too big for his own good. Whenever someone couldn't afford to pay, he'd find a way to help them anyway, quietly, without fuss. Kindness doesn't need an invoice, he'd often say with a smile. That morning, as he was closing up his workshop, a customer came in, Mr. Grant, the mailman. He was bundled in a thick coat, his cheeks red from the cold. "Daniel," he said, stamping his boots. "Got a bit of a favor to ask. There's an old lady on Elm Street, Mrs. Harper. She's been getting fewer letters lately, and I noticed her chimney hasn't smoked in weeks. I think she's struggling more than she lets on." Daniel looked up. "Evelyn Harper? I know her. My mother used to buy pies from her when I was a kid." Mr. Grant nodded. "She's a proud one, never asks for help. But something about the way she looks these days. I don't know. If you can check in on her, maybe find a way to lend a hand without making it too obvious, that'd be something." Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to intrude. But, yeah. I'll think of something." That evening, as snow began to fall softly over Maplewood, Daniel loaded his old pickup truck with a few logs from his shed. He told himself he'd just drop them off anonymously. But when he reached Elm Street, he saw the dim light through Mrs. Harper's window and felt something tug at him. He parked the truck and walked to her porch. The boards creaked beneath his boots as he knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened a few inches, revealing Evelyn's cautious eyes. "Yes?" she asked, her voice thin but steady. "Evening, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. I had some extra firewood and thought you might like a bit to get through the cold spell." Her gaze shifted to the woodpile in his arms. "That's kind, but I can't pay you for it." Daniel smiled. "Wasn't planning to charge you. I'm just trying to keep busy, and I figured the wood would do more good warming a home than sitting in my shed." Evelyn hesitated, pride wrestling with gratitude. Finally, she stepped aside. "All right. Just this once." He carried the logs inside, stacking them neatly by the hearth. The house was colder than he expected, the air sharp enough to make his breath visible. "You haven't had a fire going in a while," he said gently. "Wood's expensive," she replied. "I make do." Daniel knelt, struck a match, and soon a flame flickered to life. The warmth began to spread slowly through the room. Evelyn stood watching, her eyes glimmering in the light. "It's been a long time since that fireplace saw any use," she murmured. He smiled. "Then it's about time it did again." Over the next few days, Daniel found reasons to stop by, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with small repairs she hadn't asked for. Evelyn tried to protest, but she began to look forward to his visits. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories over tea. She told him about her late husband, how they used to dance in the living room to old records. He told her about his struggles after losing his job, how hard it was to keep hope alive when the world felt cold. One evening, Daniel brought over a small Christmas tree he'd found discarded behind the town square. Its branches were uneven, and it leaned slightly to one side, but he'd cleaned it up and added a few handmade ornaments. "It's not much," he said, setting it in the corner. Evelyn looked at it for a long moment, then smiled softly. "It's perfect." She rummaged through an old box and found a dusty angel ornament. "This belonged to my daughter," she said quietly. "She made it when she was 7. Would you do the honors?" Daniel lifted the angel and placed it at the top of the tree. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, and outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. That night, Evelyn slept better than she had in years. But kindness, like warmth, has a way of spreading farther than we expect. The next day, when Mr. Grant saw the smoke rising from Evelyn's chimney again, he mentioned it at the bakery. Soon, word traveled through the town, how a young man had helped the old widow on Elm Street without asking for anything in return. Neighbors began to notice others in need too. Mrs. Thompson brought over soup. The schoolchildren made paper snowflakes to decorate Evelyn's window. Someone anonymously left a bag of groceries at her door. Evelyn was overwhelmed. For years, she had lived quietly, convinced the world had forgotten her. Now, every knock on the door reminded her that she wasn't invisible, that kindness could find its way home, even after years of silence. One afternoon, as Daniel was fixing a loose floorboard near the hallway, Evelyn said softly, "You've done more for me than you realize, Daniel." He looked up. "I haven't done much, really." "You've done everything," she replied. "You reminded me what warmth feels like, not just from the fire, but from people." He didn't know what to say, so he just smiled. That winter was one of the harshest Maplewood had seen in decades, but somehow, the town felt warmer than ever. The spirit of giving had caught on. Neighbors who had never spoken began helping each other clear snow, share meals, and visit the lonely. On Christmas Eve, Daniel stopped by Evelyn's house one last time before heading home to spend the evening with his sister. He carried a small wooden box he had crafted himself. Inside was a hand-carved ornament shaped like a heart, painted in soft shades of gold and red. "I made this for you," he said, handing it to her. "For next year's tree." Evelyn traced the smooth edges with her wrinkled fingers. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." When Daniel turned to leave, she said, "You know, Daniel, warmth isn't something we find, it's something we give. And you've given it freely." He paused, the words sinking deep into him. "Maybe," he said, "but I think it found a home here first." They shared a smile, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to stand still. That night, after Daniel left, Evelyn sat by the fire, holding the carved heart close. She thought about how one small act had rippled through an entire town, how kindness had found its way into the cracks of her lonely life and filled them with light. In her heart, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Winter passed, and with it came spring. The snow melted from the rooftops, and the first flowers began to bloom. Evelyn spent more time outside, tending to her garden, waving to neighbors as they walked by. Daniel still visited often, though now his visits were filled with laughter rather than worry. The house on Elm Street, once cold and silent, had become a place where people stopped to talk, share stories, and leave with lighter hearts. Months later, when the town held its annual summer fair, Evelyn surprised everyone by setting up a small booth. She sold knitted scarves and mittens, each with a small tag that read, "Made with warmth. Pass it on." People loved them, not just for the craftsmanship, but for what they represented. The story of "the day warmth found a home" became something of a legend in Maplewood, told to children every winter. And though Evelyn grew older and her steps slower, the fire in her home never went out again. Every year, Daniel would bring over the same Christmas tree, slightly crooked but full of life, and together they would hang the wooden heart at the center. Because in that small house on Elm Street, warmth had truly found a home, not just in the hearth, but in the hearts of everyone it touched. And long after Evelyn's time had passed, Daniel kept the tradition alive, visiting others who needed a little light in their lives, quietly spreading the warmth that had once saved him, too. In the end, it wasn't the firewood, or the tree, or even the gifts that had changed everything. It was the simple truth that kindness, once given, never disappears. It finds a home, it grows, and it keeps the world from growing cold. That winter in Maplewood was remembered not for the snow that fell, but for the warmth that stayed. And that warmth, kindled in one quiet act of compassion, burned on, bright enough to light 1,000 hearts.